want to do today as an introduction to the book of Genesis is I want to look at how Jesus and the apostles viewed the book of Genesis. How Jesus and the apostles viewed the book of Genesis. What did they think about Genesis? How did Jesus and the apostles interpret the Genesis account, the Genesis record? And the reason why I think this is a good place for us to start, or a place to kind of launch into the study of Genesis, is because there are many theologians, many pastors, many Bible teachers who do not believe Genesis, who do not believe that Genesis is historical, or that it's factual, especially the first 11 chapters of Genesis. There are many who say that it's allegory, and that it's mythology, or it's metaphorical. And they say it's not historical, it should not be interpreted as a historical record or taken literally. They say God did not create the heavens and the earth in 6 literal days, as it says in Genesis 1, or that the first 2 people were Adam and Eve in a garden. The critics say there was no one named Noah. There was not a global flood or an ark. There was not a Sodom and Gomorrah. There was not a Tower of Babel. That all these stories that we have in the book of Genesis, that they're all folklore, they're allegory, they're metaphorical, they're not true, they're not real, they're not to be taken as factual, they're not to be believed as factual. And maybe that describes you. Maybe you're a Christian, but you don't really believe the Genesis record as historical, or that it should be taken literally. Maybe you believe it's all allegory. It's all poetic. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here for this study. And we're going to dig into the text together in the coming weeks and just see what the text says. What does the Word of God say? And let the Word of God speak for itself. And again, today what I want to do is just look at how Jesus interpreted the book of Genesis and how the apostles interpreted the book of Genesis. I would say as Christians, we want what we believe about the book of Genesis to agree with what Jesus thought about Genesis, right? I mean, as followers of Jesus, we want to be on the same page as Him. I can't imagine having the mind of, well, that's what Jesus believed, but I don't believe that. And I'll tell you right up front, just so you know, there's no surprises here. Jesus and the apostles did not allegorize Genesis. They took Genesis to be straightforward history, describing events that actually happened with people who were historical, real people that actually existed. So if you don't believe Genesis is historical or literal or true, what you believe about the Bible is different from what Jesus believed about the Bible. Okay? It's different from what the apostles believed about the Bible, and it's different from what everyone in the Bible believed about Genesis. So before we dig in, I want to give you just some statistical information about Genesis in the New Testament and how it's used in the New Testament. The book of Genesis is quoted or referenced in the New Testament 200 times. We've got a lot of verses to cover, right? We're not going to look at all 200, don't worry. More than half of the 200 references in the New Testament to Genesis are from the first 11 chapters of Genesis. So over 100 references in the New Testament are from the first 11 chapters. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are the ones that are disputed as historical. 63 of the references in the New Testament are from the first 3 chapters of Genesis. Now, those are the ones that are really, really disputed. These first 3 chapters describe the creation of all things and the fall of man. But there's 63 references in the New Testament to the first 3 chapters of Genesis. Every book of the New Testament, except for Philemon, 2 John, and 3 John, contain references to Genesis. So every book but 3. Of the 50 chapters in the book of Genesis, only 7 are not quoted in the New Testament. Only 7. And why is that important? Because critics say, well, the first 3 chapters or the first 11 chapters of Genesis are not historical. They're allegory, they're metaphor. Beginning in chapter 12, some critics say, beginning in chapter 12 to the end of Genesis, that's historical, that's reliable. But the whole book of Genesis is quoted in the New Testament. All but seven chapters. And they're all treated as real history. Jesus referenced Genesis 25 times in the Gospels. Now, I point out those statistics to say that there are many examples that we can look at in the New Testament to understand how Jesus viewed Genesis and how the apostles viewed Genesis. But we're only going to look at 7 today. There's 200 we could look at, but we're just going to look at 7. The first one I want to look at with you is in Luke chapter 3. If you want to turn there for me. Luke chapter 3. And with this example, this isn't really... this example just really shows us how not taking Genesis as historical and literal creates a lot of problems for us with the New Testament. So Luke chapter 3, beginning in verse 23, we have the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And you're thinking, oh great, a genealogy. But if you look at verse 23, now Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, because he's actually the son of God, the son of Heli, and then it starts to give you the names, the son of, the son of, the son of, the son of, his genealogy here. And now look down at verse 38 at the very end of the chapter. The genealogy of Jesus goes all the way back to Adam and then to God. Verse 38, the son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. Now, Jesus' genealogy is given here to us to demonstrate that Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises God made to David and Abraham and Adam. And that's why these names are listed in this genealogy. That's why the genealogy goes all the way back to Adam, because God made promises to David, to Abraham, and to Adam. Jesus is the seed of Eve who will crush the head of the serpent. Jesus is the seed of Abraham through whom all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And he is the seed of David whose kingdom God will establish forever. That's why Luke gives us his genealogy all the way back to Adam. Now, look at the genealogy again. If you look at verse 33, from verse 33 down to verse 38, those names are all from the book of Genesis. So if Genesis is allegorical and not historical, what do we do with the genealogy of Jesus? I mean, are we to say, well, part of this is historical and real, and these are real people, and some of them are not? The genealogy must be historical, or else Jesus descended from a myth. He descended from a myth otherwise. So immediately, just in looking at the genealogy of Jesus, immediately we see that if we don't take Genesis as historical record, well, then it creates all kinds of problems for us in the New Testament. There's things that we just can't make sense of then, if it's myth.